They found him at dawn, in a penthouse worth $12 million, wearing a bathrobe that cost more than most people make in a month, with a gun in his hand and a Wall Street Journal on the floor. The headline read something about record highs. His portfolio had tripled, and he put a bullet in his head anyway. This isn't a mystery. This is a pattern. There's a specific kind of prison cell that doesn't have bars. It has marble countertops. It has a view. It has a monthly lease payment that keeps you trapped more effectively than any chain ever could. And the most terrifying part? You asked to be locked inside. You competed for it. You worked 60-hour weeks to afford the privilege of your own captivity. I want to tell you a story about luxury, but it's not the story you think it is. This isn't about excess or greed or some moral lecture about materialism. This is about something far more sinister. This is about the most successful psychological operation ever conducted on the human mind. And it started almost exactly 100 years ago in a cramped office in Manhattan, where a man named Edward Bernays realized something that would change civilization forever. He realized that you don't control people by threatening them. You control them by making them want things. And once they want those things badly enough, they'll build their own cages and sleep inside them voluntarily. The man in the penthouse? He's not an outlier. He's a symptom. And by the time I'm done, you're going to understand exactly why comfort has become the most dangerous drug ever invented. Let me take you back to a specific moment in time. 1929, October, New York City. The air smelled like rain and gasoline and something else, something electric, something that felt like the future. Men in wool suits crowded around ticker tape machines, watching numbers climb higher and higher until the laws of gravity seemed to have been repealed entirely. Everyone was rich, or they would be soon. Or they knew someone who had made a fortune on a stock tip overheard in a barber shop. Then it all stopped. The crash didn't sound like a crash. It sounded like silence, like the sudden absence of noise. The machines stopped chattering. The phones stopped ringing. And in that silence, men started jumping out of windows because they suddenly understood that the number in their bank account was the only thing holding their entire identity together. Take away the number, and there was nothing left. Just meat and bones and a terrifying void where a self used to be. But here's what they don't teach you in school. The Great Depression wasn't just an economic event. It was a psychological experiment. And the people running that experiment were watching very carefully to see what happened when you took away people's comfort. What they discovered was this: human beings will do absolutely anything to avoid discomfort. Not pain, discomfort. The feeling of not having what they think they should have. The feeling of being less than what they believe they deserve to be. This is when the machinery started to turn. In 1933, while bread lines stretched around city blocks and families burned furniture to stay warm, a small group of industrialists and advertising executives gathered in private clubs to discuss a problem. The problem was simple. The American economy had been built on production, factories churning out goods, but there was a fatal flaw in the system. People only needed so much. Once you had a coat, you didn't need another coat. Once you owned a table, you were done buying tables. Necessity had a ceiling, and that ceiling was going to kill profits. So they asked themselves a question that would reshape the entire architecture of modern life. How do you make people buy things they don't need? How do you create desire where none exists? How do you convince a man who has everything he requires that he's still fundamentally incomplete? The answer came from psychology. Specifically, from Sigmund Freud's nephew, the same Edward Bernays I mentioned earlier. Bernays had figured something out during World War I when he worked for the government creating propaganda. He learned that human beings don't make rational decisions. They make emotional decisions and then rationalize them later with logic. He learned that you could bypass someone's conscious mind entirely and implant ideas directly into their unconscious. And he learned that the most powerful way to control behavior was through identity. Make a product part of someone's identity, and they'll buy it forever. Make them believe that owning a thing is the same as being a type of person, and you've created an endless loop of consumption that feeds on itself. Bernays started small. He convinced women to smoke cigarettes by rebranding them as torches of freedom. He turned bacon and eggs into the American breakfast by paying doctors to recommend it. But the real genius was in what came next. He didn't just sell products. He sold aspirations. He sold the idea that you could buy your way into a better version of yourself. That there was a perfect life waiting for you on the other side of a purchase. And it worked. By the 1950s, America had recovered from the Depression and won a war, and suddenly there was money again. Lots of it. The suburbs bloomed like a fungus across the landscape. Identical houses stretched to the horizon, each one equipped with the same refrigerator, the same television, the same car in the same driveway. It looked like prosperity. It looked like freedom. It looked like the American dream made physical and real. But something strange started happening. Doctors began noticing an epidemic of what they called suburban neurosis. Housewives who had everything they were supposed to want, living in homes that were supposed to represent the pinnacle of human achievement, started showing up with mysterious ailments, depression, anxiety, a creeping sense of emptiness that no amount of shopping could fill. They called it the problem that has no name. Betty Friedan would later write an entire book about it, but the real problem had a name. It just wasn't the one anyone wanted to say out loud. The problem was the cage. See, what happened in the 1950s wasn't freedom. It was the perfection of control. Every family had a mortgage. That mortgage required a steady job. That job required obedience. Obedience required ignoring the screaming void inside you that knew something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. But you couldn't listen to that voice, because listening to it meant losing the house, losing the car, losing the identity you'd built around those possessions, losing everything that proved you were a successful human being. So you took pills instead. You drank. You smiled for photographs, and you taught your children that this was normal, that this was the goal, that the purpose of life was to acquire a slightly larger cage than your parents had. The machinery had perfected itself. Now let me bring you forward to today, to this exact moment. You're reading these words, probably on a device that costs several $100s. Maybe you're in a room with furniture you bought, wearing clothes with brand names, surrounded by objects that serve as proof that you exist, that you matter, that you're doing okay in a world that constantly tells you you're not doing enough. How much of what you own do you actually need? How much of it is truly yours, and how much of it owns you? Here's a thought experiment. Imagine right now that every single thing you bought in the last year disappeared. Not the necessities, the other stuff, the upgrades, the conveniences, the small luxuries that you justified as rewards for working hard. What would actually change in your life? Would you be less happy? Or would you just be less distracted from the question of whether you're happy at all? This is where the trap reveals itself. Luxury isn't about the objects. Luxury is about the promise that the next thing will finally be enough, that the next purchase, the next upgrade, the next level of comfort will deliver the feeling of satisfaction that the last one didn't. It's a horizon that moves every time you get close to it, and that's by design. The modern economy requires your dissatisfaction. It requires you to feel incomplete. If you ever felt truly satisfied, truly content with what you have, the entire system would collapse. So every advertisement, every Instagram post, every carefully curated image of someone else's perfect life exists to remind you that you're not there yet, that you're missing something, that there's a gap between who you are and who you should be, and that gap can be filled with products. This is the update. This is the 1950s on steroids and algorithms. The cage doesn't look like a cage anymore. It looks like a lifestyle. It has an aesthetic. It has a hashtag. People volunteer to advertise their own captivity because being in a beautiful cage is the new status symbol. The bars are made of thread counts and brand partnerships and monthly subscription services that will absolutely change your life until they don't and you need the next one. Let me tell you about a different kind of person. His name was Diogenes, and he lived in ancient Greece around 350 years before Christ. Diogenes owned nothing. He slept in a large ceramic jar in the marketplace. He begged for food. He owned one cloak, one staff, and a wooden bowl until he saw a child drinking water from his hands and realized even the bowl was unnecessary luxury, so he threw it away. One day, Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the known world, came to visit Diogenes. Alexander had conquered nations. He had wealth beyond measure. He stood over this homeless man living in a jar and said, "I am Alexander the Great. Ask anything of me, and it shall be yours." Diogenes looked up at him and said, "Yes, move out of my sunlight." Alexander later told his men, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Now, I'm not suggesting you go live in a jar, but I am suggesting you think about what that story means. Diogenes had nothing, and he was free. Alexander had everything, and he was a slave to maintaining it. Every conquest required another conquest. Every victory created new enemies. Every possession required protection. The wealthiest man in the world looked at a homeless man and felt envy, because Diogenes had solved the equation. He had found the 0 point, the place where you need nothing from anyone, where you can't be controlled because there's nothing to take from you. He had discovered that freedom isn't about having more, it's about needing less. This is the secret they don't want you to know. This is the one idea that threatens the entire structure. That maybe, just maybe, the solution to feeling trapped isn't a bigger cage. It's no cage at all. But let's be honest about what that means. It means looking at everything you own and asking the uncomfortable question, is this thing serving me, or am I serving it? Is this object making my life better, or is it making demands on my time, my money, my attention, my freedom? Is this luxury actually luxurious, or is it just expensive discomfort that I've been trained to interpret as success? Most people never ask these questions because the answers are terrifying. The answers require change, and change requires letting go. And letting go means admitting that maybe you were wrong about what you needed. Maybe you sacrificed years of your life for things that don't actually matter. Maybe the entire trajectory you've been on is pointed in the wrong direction. That's a hard pill to swallow. It's easier to buy another thing. It's easier to scroll. It's easier to believe that you're fine, that this is fine, that everyone lives like this, so it must be normal. But here's what normal means. Normal means the average person in America works until they're 65 years old, retires with barely enough saved, and dies within 15 years of stopping work. Normal means spending the best years of your life in fluorescent-lit rooms, doing tasks you don't care about, to buy things you don't need, to impress people you don't like. Normal means medicating yourself through a life you can't stand because you're too afraid to imagine an alternative. Normal is the cage, and the door has been unlocked the entire time. Let me tell you what unlocking it actually looks like, because this isn't abstract philosophy. This is actionable and real and happening right now in ways that scare the hell out of the people profiting from your captivity. There are people who have figured it out. They're called different things depending on who's talking. Minimalists, digital nomads, early retirees, van dwellers, off-grid homesteaders. The labels don't matter. What matters is they all made the same fundamental choice. They looked at the equation of modern life. The equation that says you trade 40 hours a week for 40 years in exchange for comfort and security. and they said no. They found the loophole. The loophole is this: your expenses are the bars of your cage. Every monthly payment is a chain. Every subscription is a link. Every object you own that requires maintenance or insurance or space is another lock on the door. But if you reduce your expenses to almost nothing, something magical happens. You need almost no income. And if you need almost no income, you need almost no job. And if you need almost no job, you get back the only thing that actually matters: time. Your life. The hours that were being sold back to you in 2-week increments called vacation. I know what you're thinking. This sounds like poverty. This sounds like deprivation. This sounds like giving up everything good in life to sit in a cabin somewhere eating beans. But that's the programming talking. That's the voice that was installed in your head by people who profit when you're afraid of having less. Let me reframe it. What if you worked 6 months a year and spent the other 6 months doing whatever you wanted? What if you lived in a small, well-designed space that required almost no maintenance instead of a large house that demanded constant attention? What if you owned 50 things you loved instead of 5,000 things you're indifferent to? What if you spent your money on experiences and learning and freedom instead of objects that depreciate the moment you buy them? This isn't poverty. This is precision. This is cutting away everything that doesn't matter so you can focus entirely on what does. The people who figured this out aren't suffering. They're awake. They're present. They're not checking their phone every 5 minutes because they're not using consumption to fill a void. They're not working jobs they hate because they're not trying to maintain a lifestyle they don't even enjoy. They're not afraid of Monday morning because Monday looks the same as Saturday when you're not selling your time. This is what luxury actually is, not the expensive thing, the freedom to not need the expensive thing, the ability to walk past a store and feel nothing, to see an advertisement and recognize it as manipulation instead of instruction, to measure your life by the depth of your experiences instead of the value of your possessions. But getting there requires something most people aren't willing to do. It requires admitting that you've been lied to, that the people you trusted, the institutions you believed in, the culture you absorbed, all of it was designed to turn you into a productive, obedient consumer who mistakes comfort for happiness and possessions for identity. It requires letting go of the status games, the comparisons, the need to prove yourself through objects. It requires becoming okay with people thinking you're strange or irresponsible or wasting your potential because you're not climbing the ladder they're on. It requires courage. And here's the thing about courage. The system can't give it to you. You can't buy it. It's not in the next purchase. It's not hiding at the next income level. Courage is what happens when you stop running from discomfort and start running toward truth. When you stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What do I actually need?" When you stop trying to build a life that looks good and start building a life that feels real. The man in the penthouse at the beginning of this story, the one who had everything and chose nothing, he ran out of courage. He got to the top of the ladder and realized it was leaning against the wrong wall, and instead of climbing down and finding a different wall, he jumped. I'm telling you, there's a different option. You can climb down. You can walk away. You can choose a different game entirely. But you have to do it now, while you still have time, before the mortgage gets too big, before the lifestyle inflation makes it impossible to imagine living any other way, before you wake up at 55 years old and realize you traded your entire existence for a comfortable coffin. The cage is real, but so is the key. And the key is simple. It's not an object. It's not a product. It's not something you acquire. It's something you release. Every attachment, every need, every story you've told yourself about who you have to be and what you have to own to be that person, let it go, all of it, and see what's left. See who you are when you're not defined by what you have. See what your life looks like when it's not structured around acquiring and maintaining and protecting and displaying. I think you'll find something there. Something that was always there, buried under the pile. Something that doesn't need luxury because it is luxury, the most expensive thing in the world, the thing no amount of money can buy once you've sold it. Yourself, free, unchained, alive. The cage is open. You just have to walk out.